Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a literal geopolitical butterfly effect. It's this fascinating, albeit intense situation where a dispute in one very specific corner of the globe has the power to send massive shockwaves through the entire global economy. We're going to break down the ongoing tensions between the United States and Iran and look at exactly how this complex standoff dictates global energy markets, shipping routes, and the economic security of nations halfway across the world, especially major importers like India. Let's get into it. I want to kick things off by putting this number right in front of you, 33. It sounds pretty small, right? But right now, this number represents the extreme fragility of our global oil transport. 33 kilometers. That is the entire width of the Strait of Hormuz at its absolute narrowest point. Just 33 kilometers of water, literally a distance shorter than running a marathon, is all that stands between smooth global trade and a full-blown international energy crisis. Section 1. The world's narrowest choke point. Let's look at the geographic epicenter of this whole narrative.
So looking at the geography, the Strait of Hormuz is essentially the one and only sea route for oil exports out of most Gulf countries. It sits squarely with Iran to the north and Oman and the United Arab Emirates to the south. It's the vital connector linking the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman and ultimately the Arabian Sea. By its very geographic design, whoever navigates or controls, this strait holds the keys to the entire global energy supply chain. It's a real bottleneck.
To really put that into perspective, take a look at the contrast here. On one hand, you have some of the wealthiest major exporters on the planet relying entirely on this route: Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, the UAE, Qatar, and of course, Iran itself. A massive, totally irreplaceable share of the world's globally traded crude oil and liquefied natural gas passes through here every single day. But then, on the flip side, contrast that with the global vulnerabilities. Any disruption in this narrow waterway instantly impacts global oil prices, it destabilizes LNG markets, and it skyrockets both shipping costs and insurance premiums. The world's energy quite literally hinges on this single stretch of water. Section 2. Roots of U.S.-Iran tensions. Knowing how critical this geography is, we have to look at the history that turns this strait into such a global flashpoint. These tensions didn't just happen overnight. They're deeply rooted in decades of complex history. The modern friction really begins in 1979 with the Iranian Revolution. That's when Iran became an Islamic republic, which led to a sharp and lasting deterioration in relations with the United States. In the decades following that, a major persistent point of dispute has been Iran's nuclear program. The US and several Western countries have long accused Iran of pursuing a nuclear weapons capability, while Iran maintains that its nuclear program is strictly for peaceful purposes. Fast forward to today, and the culmination of this ongoing dispute is extensive U.S. economic sanctions that deliberately target Iran's oil exports, banking sector, shipping, and technology. And this friction is further complicated by deeply entrenched regional rivalries. It's like a giant puzzle of alliances. The United States actively supports allies in the region, like Israel, Saudi Arabia, and various Gulf states. Meanwhile, Iran provides support to various regional armed groups and political allies across West Asia. This ongoing strategic competition creates a highly volatile environment. It's a veritable powder keg surrounding the strait where uncertainty over diplomacy and military escalation is just constantly looming in the background. Section 3. Global shockwaves. Rising prices. Let's shift gears from the geopolitical history to the immediate psychology of global energy markets. Now, what's really interesting about this is the massive gap between actual disruptions and perceived risks. You might think oil prices only spike when a ship is actually blocked, right? But markets are incredibly psychological. Traders react fiercely to perceived risks. Actually, scratch that. It's more like they react to the mere fear of disruption. Just the anticipation that tankers might be delayed, routes could be blocked, or military conflict might intensify. That is enough for traders to bid up oil prices and insurance costs. The tension itself prices in the risk of supply disruption way before a single physical event even occurs. And, well, those fears are based on very real vulnerabilities. Remember that 33-kilometer width we talked about? The designated shipping lanes within the strait are actually much narrower than that. This creates a severe bottleneck, which essentially turns massive, slow-moving commercial vessels into sitting ducks. They are highly vulnerable to naval confrontations, missile and drone attacks, sea mines, and harassment by fast attack craft. Section 4. The direct impact on India. Let's zoom out from the Middle East for a second and see how this localized tension hits the shores and the wallets of a specific major player. I want to show you this staggering figure.
85%. That tells the whole story for India. They import around 85% of their crude oil requirement. Because of this absolutely massive reliance on imported energy, India is exceptionally vulnerable to the international price fluctuations caused by any instability in the Strait of Hormuz. And this brilliantly illustrates the exact economic domino effect that gets triggered within India when global oil prices rise. Step 1, India's import expenditure immediately shoots up, placing heavy pressure on the national trade deficit. Step 2, because oil is traded in dollars, higher oil imports require greater payments in US dollars. That spikes the demand for foreign exchange, which can ultimately weaken the Indian rupee. And finally, step 3, this whole sequence culminates in broad inflation hitting the domestic market. Taking those big macroeconomic concepts down to everyday reality, this geopolitical standoff takes a direct journey from the port right to your kitchen. Higher crude prices at the port translate immediately to higher costs at the pump for petrol and diesel. And because freight transport costs go up, the logistics of moving goods becomes way more expensive. That inevitably shows up as higher prices on your grocery bill, cooking gas, the whole shebang. On a national level, the government suddenly faces intense fiscal pressure as they try to manage this inflation, usually by tweaking fuel taxes or increasing subsidies. Section 5, Securing India's Energy Future. So how does a nation so heavily reliant on imported oil protect itself from these external shocks? Let's pivot to their strategy of resilience. Taking control of its destiny, India has developed a really dynamic, multi-pronged approach to cushion these shocks. First, they're actively diversifying their energy sources, importing crude not just from the Middle East, but from places like Russia, the US, and Africa. Second, they maintain strategic petroleum reserves, which are basically giant emergency crude oil stockpiles to weather short-term disruptions. Third, and this is absolutely crucial for the long term, they're accelerating investments in renewable energy. We're talking solar, wind, green hydrogen, and biofuels, all to fundamentally break that dependence on imported fossil fuels. And finally, they are proactively enhancing their maritime security. So the crucial point in understanding that maritime security aspect is this term SLOCs, or Sea Lines of Communication. These are the primary maritime routes used across the globe for international trade, energy transportation, and military logistics. Think of them as the invisible highways of the ocean. And for India, these highways are a matter of sheer survival. Over 90% of India's trade by volume is seaborne. Most of that essential imported crude oil we were just talking about, it travels directly through key SLOCs in the Indian Ocean and adjoining waters. Securing these specific routes isn't just about protecting trade. It is a core national security priority. This is where the Indian Navy steps in, playing a massive role in protecting India's maritime interests. They aren't just sitting back and watching, they are actively out there escorting merchant vessels to ensure freedom of navigation through these super fragile supply chains. They conduct non-stop anti-piracy patrols, they are continually enhancing their maritime domain awareness to spot threats early, and they cooperate with partner navies to stabilize the region. They are literally guarding the economic lifelines of the country. Which brings us to the ultimate question we have to ask ourselves after looking at all of this. Will a mere 33-kilometer strait forever hold the power to dictate global security? Or will the accelerating race toward renewable energy finally break our reliance on this incredibly volatile choke point? It is a massive global transition unfolding right in front of us. And honestly, the winner is going to define the next century. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking questions, and I'll catch you next time.